for my voice, but I have never seen anything like it.
The game over. You believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
Alrighty, welcome to the podcast. I'm Andrew Zimmel, your host as always, talking about 11/23/63, a miniseries on Hulu that I just checked out. A lot of stuff happening on the podcast page today. If you haven't already seen, bunch of podcasts are out that you need to check out. A lot of great stuff, a little bit of sports, a little bit of pop culture, a lot of TV shows because we all are in quarantine. If you are in a city who is being locked down, if you're being shut down, big fines, even some prison time I've seen. Look, don't risk it. Please, please, please be safe. Please continue to social distance yourself and wash hands. I had to remind somebody the other day, social distancing does not mean that we're just all going to hang out. We're not having quarantine parties. That is not a thing. I have my snacks. I have my food. I'm ready to go when this all shuts down. I think that's what we need to do here. We're going to talk to Alexander Haynes later in the week about it, though. So tune into that. Let's talk about 11/23/63. A little bit of background. So I remember, had to be 5 or 6 years now. I remember my mom reading a Stephen King book. It had JFK on the cover. I immediately was intrigued. I'm a big poli-sci guy, big history buff. I like that type of stuff. So when she brings this book out, when she's talking to me a little bit about it, what it's about, Stephen King, automatically I'm very intrigued by all of his work. Very few misses by Stephen King. One of the rarities who's hitting at like 88, 89% for his books. All of them have been very good. So Stephen King puts this book out, and I'm taken away. I'm swept away by it. It turns into a miniseries. I don't know how I missed this. I don't know what I was doing in 2016. It came out in February of 2016. This miniseries, it follows English teacher Jake Epping as he travels back in time. Already, a lot of intrigue. Travels back in time to stop JFK's assassination, but many elements threaten his mission. That's what Rotten Tomatoes wrote about the show. That's the preview they gave. The audience score, high, 88%. The tomato score from the critics is 83%, so this is a solid B for a show. I gave it an A+. I'm going to tell you why. So, miniseries, 8 episodes, all of them about an hour and a half long. It stars James Franco, who I know, very problematic, kind of canceled in a lot of circles. But if you aren't 100% off James Franco, if there's still a sliver of you who says, I like Franco, I'd like to give him another shot, let me see what he can do for me, this is the type of show for you. So, show starts, Jake is teaching at a high school after-school program for adults. He's working with a janitor who's telling this graphic story about how his family was murdered by his father, and how he was injured in this fight with his dad when he was a kid, and it moves Jake. So then he goes to the diner. He's finalizing his divorce. We see his wife, or his ex-wife at this point, giving him the divorce papers, and that is when Chris Cooper comes in, who plays Al Tempton in this miniseries, owner of the diner, and he shows Jake this meat locker, which will take you back to 1960. Immediately, Jake is very skeptical. He says, what do you mean, time travel? Why is it 1960? He's got a lot of questions. Al says, go out, carve your name, go into the meat locker, carve your initials into the tree, then come right back. So he does it, and you can see that the initials are now in the tree. That nothing else has changed, but the initials are now in the tree. And, okay, why should Jake go back? Well, it turns out that Al has cancer, that his mission was to go back in time and save John F. Kennedy from the assassination attempt, that he has all this information about when it happens, who does it, all sorts of stuff. He says, I'm not for sure that Lee Harvey Oswald is the shooter. I don't know if there is a second shooter, but I have all this information for you. You need to go back in time and stop the assassination. And that is exactly what Jake does. So you get 8 episodes of Jake not only having kind of side adventures, all working towards the prevention of the assassination of JFK. I want to give a shout out, and we didn't do this on the other TV podcasts because they are still ongoing. This one is done. Again, like I mentioned, it came out in 2016. I want to give ratings for the cast who come into this show, blew me away. James Franco, of course, gets an A+. He did an incredible job in the show. But I want to give a shout out to George McKay, who you might remember. I think he's in a 1917 as well. He's in 1917 as well. Been in a couple other relatively well-known shows. 1917 is his most famous role to this point. Leon Ripley, who plays Harry, who is the janitor who gets killed. But the guy who really took me away, really impressed me, was Daniel Weber. Daniel Weber played Lee Harvey Oswald in the show, and I thought he did an excellent job. If you don't know a ton about Lee Harvey Oswald, if you're not a big Lee Harvey Oswald buff, history buff, if you just aren't a history person in general, I strongly recommend you go back and just watch a documentary, watch a little bit of a documentary, watch any of those YouTube shows, not the ones made by conspiracy theorists. The History Channel ones are very good on Oswald. And just the psyche that he had, a little bit of his background. I'm really into that type of stuff. Call me a weirdo. The history stuff really gets to me. Daniel Weber does an incredible job in this show of really portraying Lee Harvey Oswald, not only as a sympathetic character, which I think is difficult to do. I think that anytime you're playing the assassination of a president, it's hard to get in that mindset to play that type of character. I thought Weber did an incredible job. I thought he took a little bit of a creative license with it as well, and that I take with a grain of salt. I thought he did a really good job. Let's talk about my favorite episode of the show. My favorite episode of the show, of course, would be the last one, where everything finally comes together, where you get the final payoff. But I want to talk a little bit about, and this character is played by Sarah Galden, who plays Sadie. Sadie turns into the love interest of Jake while he's going back in time. Sadie, we see multiple times throughout the show's run. Jake first meets her when she's in Dallas as he's kind of scoping out the area in 1960. Remember, the assassination attempt was 3 years later in 63. He's there in 60, he's kind of scoping it out. He sees Sadie, meets her husband, really in passing, but you can tell early in the show that she's going to play a big part. There's a scene later on where he has to save her life. And that scene, to me, really made me panicky because one of the things that you get as you watch the show and you learn is that time will always push back. If you're trying to fight time, time will always find a way to fight back. And in this scene, time is fighting back and trying to take Sadie's life. And you see Jake, played by James Franco, like I mentioned, really see panic in his eyes. And I thought that they played the scene perfectly. I thought that the scene did everything that I really look for in a show like this, in a drama. It gave me, honestly, everything I was looking for. And this is one of the rare shows that I put everything on hold. I put Dave, I put Devs, I put Seinfeld, all the shows that I'm binging and I'm watching, all the movies that I want to see, put everything on hold so I could watch this miniseries, so I could binge this series, because I wanted to see how it ended. Because I remember my mom reading the book about how she was enthralled by it and how she went through the book very quickly. She's a quick reader in general, but she went through that book very quickly. This, from all accounts, from audiences, from critics, everybody seems to love this show. And I really enjoyed it too, and I think you will as well as we sit in quarantine. Okay? This is a show for you. If you're just hanging out, if you're just watching it, I think that everybody can binge this relatively quickly. There's not a lot of slow moments. Strongly recommend. That's going to do it for the show. Like I mentioned, Alexander Haynes is going to come on the podcast later this week, talk to us about our current events, talk to us a little bit about what we can expect from quarantines, and, of course, news from around the world and domestic news, what you can expect if you live in a major metropolitan area and big cities. So that's going to come out later this week. Tomorrow, we're talking about the NL West preview and a couple other news and notes. So tune in then. I will talk to you guys tomorrow.